Walk me through, what exactly is Flash Flood Alley? Where is it? What's the significance of it?
Sure. So Flash Flood Alley is the name given to sort of a belt across central Texas, really reaches up from New Braunfels almost all the way to the Dallas Metroplex. And that's an area that's considered especially vulnerable to flash flooding. The combination of humidity in Texas, no surprise to anyone that lives there, the very high potential for high rainfall rates, combined within that area, the way the landscape is shaped. So we think about not just where rain falls, but what it falls on top of. And in the Flash Flood Alley region of Texas, it falls on small rivers, small creeks that turn into big rivers. It falls on a lot of rocky, hilly terrain, and that can lead to a lot of water instead of absorbing into the ground, running off and creating flooding problems. So, especially in that area, flash flooding is common. Those very heavy rainstorms, dropping a lot of water on the ground really quickly, and then the ground not having a lot of capacity to soak that water in and instead sending it all downstream in massive bursts. Not to mention in the urban areas where we have pavement instead of dirt, right? And so more water runs off and creates issues in those urban areas too. Those factors combined make Flash Flood Alley a real target for some of the nation's large flash flood events.
Now, why is, Central Texas the real focus of this? Because, of course, there are rivers in other parts of the country, there's humidity in other parts of the country. Why is this something that's so common or more common in Central Texas?
Sure. So we're talking about a really big area, right, across Texas, and so you see a lot of those factors all combined across a large area. We'll see similar things happen too. You think of some of the slot canyons out west, right, where the thunderstorms might happen in those really narrow, steep terrain. In the Rockies, they don't usually have the humidity that Texas has, right? But they certainly have some of the terrain that funnels water downstream quickly. You see it in hillier parts of the East Coast too, where you might see the humidity, but generally you don't have quite that same dry, rocky area that you might see in some of the parts of Central Texas. So a large area combined with a lot of the factors that make flash flooding happen really make Flash Flood Alley a focus.
Now, I just want to, be clear on this. Is Flash Flood Alley a place where flash flooding, you'd say, is common or just more common than it would be in other areas?
That's a really good question. There are a lot of flash floods that happen in Texas, but it also covers a really large area, right? So it's difficult to say, sort of, it's more prone to flash flooding, but certainly it's incredibly common in Flash Flood Alley in Texas to have flash flood events happen. And also, unfortunately, it's where a lot of people live. So that combination of the scientific factors, the rainfall, the landscape contributing to flash floods, and also large population centers make it especially vulnerable.
You mentioned those large population centers. What role does urbanization, play in these floods? Because of course we've seen a rapid population growth along, the I-35 corridor in Texas, where some of this you're describing is.
Absolutely. So when you replace dirt with pavement, you have the opportunity to increase the amount of water that runs off from a rainstorm. It's hard to attribute any one thing to the flood, of course, but what you definitely see is an increased amount of people in the way of these flash floods. So you see, as the population increases, the number of people who could be affected by a flash flood is also increasing.
I do want to ask, in the hill country, we saw flash floods rise, the river rise significantly in the blink of an eye. Were you guys at the NWS surprised at all by that? Is that something that's common, that rapid rise of water, such a short span of time?
So we define a flash flood as a flood that happens within minutes to hours of the initiating event, in this case, a heavy rainfall event. So the very definition of a flash flood is just how quickly they come on. In other parts of the country and further downstream in Texas, you may see the rivers take a longer time to rise and then a longer time to fall. At the tops of the basins, right, where the hill may separate where the rain runs off from one area to another, you have the very smaller creeks, and also the potential for the rises to shoot up very quickly, since the water falls there and then immediately runs into those creeks and streams.
Could you see Flash Flood Alley, the location changing at all in the future, or has it changed at all, in recent years?
So one of the driving things behind Flash Flood Alley is the terrain, right? The geography, and that's fairly stable. Of course, after large events like this that we've seen recently in Texas, the specific location of the channel might move, and so what used to be considered the floodplain can spread out as the river actually makes new banks, given the power of water changing where the channel happens. But for the most part, Flash Flood Alley, as determined by where the rivers and streams are, what the sort of underlying ground is like, the rocks, that stays pretty stable. Of course, with the potential to see heavy rainfall events, you see increased threat with additional population and people living and working in such a beautiful area. You also have more people in harm's way.
In the event of a flash flood, what is your best recommendation for people? What should people do to stay safe?
That's a really great question. So before a flood, as your local media, local weather service offices are messaging the risk of heavy rainfall, we encourage folks to know before they go. So consider changing your travel plans, consider when you might be out and vulnerable, and think of ways to get warnings during that period. Make sure that you stay connected. Of course, we always unfortunately mention that half of all flood fatalities are vehicle related. And so we really want to tell folks to turn around, don't drown when you encounter a flooded roadway, avoid driving at night when flood hazards can be harder to see, and stay weather and water aware.
Anything else you'd like to tell our audience about Flash Flood Alley?
Certainly, we want to let people know as they live in, travel to areas that are known to be prone to flooding, to keep that weather and water awareness, have a plan, have ways to get warnings, and keep an eye on the forecast when flooding might threaten.